Hello! So if you watched the last video, you saw a 21-year-old guy named Mehmed the Second standing in the ruins of Constantinople, having just ended the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire, Hagia Sophia freshly converted into a mosque, banners up, job done. Roll credits, right? Nope. Turns out conquering the most defended city in the medieval world wasn't the finale. It was the opening scene. What Mehmed built on top of that conquest becomes an empire that eventually spans 3 continents, lasts over 600 years, and at various points controls everything from Algeria to Iraq to the gates of Vienna. Twice. This is the Ottoman Empire, and yes, we're doing the full 600 years, so buckle up. Historically, Facts, Part 28. Territory Tracker. 1 city. Every time this empire gets meaningfully bigger, we're updating the counter. Let's see how far this goes. The Consolidation. Here's the thing about Mehmed the Second that most people miss. Taking Constantinople wasn't the hard part. Keeping an empire from falling apart after a massive conquest, that's the hard part. And that's usually where these stories end badly. Remember, we just spent an entire video watching an empire slowly bleed out over centuries because of exactly that problem. Mehmed does something smart. Instead of destroying what's left of Byzantine administration, he absorbs it, keeps Greek Orthodox officials in positions of power, lets the church keep operating under Ottoman oversight, and essentially tells the conquered population, "Congratulations, you're still here, just under new management." It's less burn it all down, and more corporate acquisition. He also does something genuinely wild for the era. He creates a formal system of religious tolerance called the Millet System, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims all operate under their own religious courts for personal matters, while answering to the Sultan for everything else. For a 15th century empire, that's shockingly progressive bureaucracy. Territory Tracker. 2 continents. Mehmed's successors keep pushing outward, into the Balkans, along the Black Sea coast, deep into Anatolia, until by the early 1500s the empire spans Europe and Asia simultaneously. Then, in 1520, we meet the guy who takes this from large regional power to actual global superpower. Suleiman I, though Europeans call him Suleiman the Magnificent, and the Ottomans themselves call him Kanuni, the lawgiver. Because apparently being magnificent and a legal genius is just the vibe of this particular dynasty. Section 1. The Golden Age. Suleiman inherits an already massive empire and decides that's not enough. He pushes into Hungary, crushes the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs in one afternoon so thoroughly that historians still use it as a textbook example of tactical annihilation, and by 1529, Ottoman forces are literally camped outside the walls of Vienna. Wait, hold on, says basically all of Habsburg Europe. Vienna? As in, the Vienna that's supposed to be safely in the middle of the continent? Nowhere near any of this? Yes, says Suleiman, essentially, that Vienna. The siege ultimately fails, weather and supply lines mostly to blame, but the fact that it happened at all permanently rearranges how Europe thinks about this empire. This isn't some far-off regional power anymore. This is a legitimate threat to the heart of the continent. Territory Tracker. 3 continents. With North Africa folding into Ottoman control throughout Suleiman's reign, Algeria, Tunisia, eventually parts of the Arabian Peninsula, the empire officially spans Europe, Asia, and Africa at the same time. For context, that's the same 3-continent spread that made Rome the biggest empire ever flex in our first video. Different empire, same flex. Suleiman doesn't just conquer, though. He overhauls the entire legal and administrative system, standardizes taxation, reforms the justice system, and commissions the architect Mimar Sinan to build some of the most technically advanced mosques and public infrastructure of the era. The Süleymaniye Mosque alone took 7 years, and represents engineering that wouldn't be matched in Europe for generations. Meanwhile, back at the palace, there's an entire parallel institution running things you've probably never heard of unless you've specifically looked into this, the Devshirme system, where young Christian boys from Balkan provinces are conscripted, converted to Islam, and trained either into the elite Janissary military corps or into administrative positions, sometimes rising to literally become the Grand Vizier, the second most powerful person in the empire. It's a genuinely bizarre system by modern standards, forced conscription functioning as a meritocratic path to the absolute top of imperial government, and it produces some of the most effective bureaucrats and soldiers in Ottoman history. Territory Tracker. Peak reached. By the time Suleiman dies in 1566, during fittingly another military campaign in Hungary, the Ottoman Empire controls roughly 2 million square kilometers, commands the most feared navy in the Mediterranean, and functions as the wealthiest, most administratively sophisticated state in the world. This is the peak. Everything from here is managing the peak. Section 2. The Long Plateau. For roughly the next century after Suleiman, the empire doesn't collapse, it just stops growing the way it used to. Sultans after Suleiman are, to put it generously, a mixed bag. Some are capable administrators. Some spend most of their reign inside the palace's inner chambers, a period historians somewhat awkwardly call the Sultanate of Women, where mothers and wives of sultans wield enormous behind-the-scenes political influence, because the actual sultans are, in several cases, either children or simply not that interested in governing. The empire doesn't need brilliant expansion during this stretch, because the administrative system Suleiman built is genuinely strong enough to run on autopilot for a while. Taxes get collected, trade routes stay open, the Janissary Corps keeps functioning. It's less dramatic than conquest, sure, but boring and stable is historically a pretty good place for an empire to be. It doesn't last. By the late 1600s, the Second Siege of Vienna happens in 1683, and this time it goes very differently. A combined European relief force, including a genuinely spectacular cavalry charge by Polish forces, breaks the siege decisively. This isn't just a military loss. It's the moment the psychological momentum flips. For over 200 years, Europe had been reacting to Ottoman expansion. After 1683, the Ottomans start reacting to European expansion instead. Territory Tracker. Contracting. Over the following century, the empire slowly loses ground in the Balkans and the Black Sea region, piece by piece, treaty by treaty, war by war, to an increasingly powerful and unified Europe. Section 3. The sick man of Europe. By the 1800s, European diplomats have started calling the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe, which is, historically speaking, possibly the rudest nickname any empire has ever been given by its neighbors, while still technically being a functioning state. The empire attempts genuine reform during this period called the Tanzimat, which tries to modernize the legal system, expand citizenship rights, reform taxation, and essentially drag a 17th century administrative structure into the 19th century. It's a real serious effort, and in some areas it genuinely works. But it's also happening while the empire is simultaneously losing Greece to independence, losing Egypt to British influence, and watching Balkan nationalist movements chip away at territory with every passing decade. Territory Tracker. Shrinking fast. By 1912, a series of conflicts called the Balkan Wars strip away most of the empire's remaining European territory in less than a year. The empire that once camped outside Vienna now barely holds on to a sliver of land in Europe at all. And then, in 1914, the empire makes what turns out to be the single worst strategic decision in its 600-year history. Section 4. The end. World War I breaks out, and the Ottoman Empire, looking for allies against Russia and Britain, both of whom it has genuine reason to distrust, sides with Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Central Powers, they lose. The war devastates what's left of the empire. Territory across the Middle East gets carved up by British and French forces, in some cases literally drawn with rulers on maps by officials who had never visited the region, decisions whose consequences are, let's be honest, still actively shaping global politics today. The empire that once stretched across 3 continents ends the war controlling basically just Anatolia, and even that's under threat of foreign occupation. Territory Tracker. Nearly zero. What's left of the empire is formally dissolved in 1922. A military officer and reformer named Mustafa Kemal, later given the name Ataturk, father of the Turks, leads a war of independence against occupying forces, wins, and establishes the modern Republic of Turkey in 1923, explicitly built as a secular nation-state, a deliberate and total break from 6 centuries of imperial sultanate tradition. The last Ottoman Sultan leaves the country quietly on a British warship, which is, if you think about it for a second, an almost unbearably poetic way for a 600-year empire to end. Not a dramatic last stand. Not a final siege. Just a guy getting on a boat and leaving. Closing. So here's the thing that gets me about this whole trilogy we've just told across 3 videos. Rome ends. The eastern half survives another 1,000 years as Byzantium. Byzantium finally falls to the Ottomans in 1453. And then the Ottoman Empire, the one that ended the last true Roman Empire, spends the next 469 years slowly following almost the exact same pattern. Golden Age, plateau, slow territorial bleed, one catastrophically bad strategic decision, collapse. It's not that history repeats itself exactly. It's that empires, it turns out, are all running roughly the same program. Rise fast, peak, get comfortable, get out-innovated by whoever's next, lose a war they shouldn't have entered, dissolve. Rome did it. Byzantium did it slower. The Ottomans did it too, just with better mosques along the way. If you want to know what actually happened during that map-carving process after World War I, and why it's still causing problems today, let me know in the comments, because that, again, is genuinely a whole other video. Subscribe, become a member, and remember, next time you're on top of the world, maybe don't pick a side in a world war just because you don't trust the other guys more. Historically speaking, that one rarely works out.